some noise? Many of you know that I sing, and I just cannot sing that song from up here. I turn into a puddle. And I thought, I can't do it. Somebody else has got to do this or I won't be able to speak today. Thank you, Shanna. It's part of our theme, Heart at Peace. Heart at Peace, what I'm talking about today. And let's see if this is on. There is only love. There's only love. I went and looked up some quotes just to go along with that theme and kind of take us into the rest of the talk. And of course, in God we live, move, and have our being. Right? That's from the Old Testament. Then we have the highest God and the innermost God is one God. That is like the central tenet of what we teach here in Centers for Spiritual Living, that the highest God and the innermost God is one God. In other words, every one of us is spirit expressing. And when you look at one another, know that you are looking at the face of God. And then we have God is love. Those who live in love live in God, and we are all love. That is the truth of who we are. And yet, it's easy to feel and hear. Right? It's easy. You sing a beautiful song, and it's all wonderful, and you well up, and maybe you get teary like I do, and it's just so beautiful. And then we go outside, and then we check our Facebook, and then we watch the news, and then we see the covers of the magazines and the newspaper, and you think, if God is love, if this is love, where the heck is it? Why is it not everywhere? Why don't we just feel like we're swimming in it? And instead we have things like this. Us, I don't know if you can see from where you are. Us and them. Right? People on opposite sides of that spectrum. And it doesn't matter if you're a vegan or a carnivore, if you're a Democrat or you're a Republican, if you're black or you're white, or you're Muslim or you're Christian. There's all this animosity there seems to be in this country at this time. And I guess it's not just here. It's kind of a worldwide thing. There is something going on. There is really something going on. Why are you destroying the country? It's us against them. How do we transfer this feeling that we get when we're in here to the rest of our lives, right? To other places. I know I was in a retreat probably a couple of years ago actually, and it was one of those really like kumbaya moments. Everybody's just singing, the love is flowing and the tears are flowing and people's hearts are wide open. And then we realize, I have to go home soon. And people start with, then I have to go to the real world. And Reverend Dr. Ken Gordon, who's the spiritual leader of Centers for Spiritual Living, said, I just want you to all know that the feeling that we're feeling right now, this is the real world. This is the real world. Every bit as real as whatever we see out there. And our job, our task, is to extend that, right? Is to radiate that so that we transform this crazy, this ugly, us against them into that feeling where it goes with us wherever we are. And so that's what I'm talking about this month. Well, that's what the year is about really for us. It's spirituality in action. And I can think of no greater spiritual action than this idea of peace building. So I was introduced to this book, The Anatomy of Peace, by the folks at River Phoenix Center and some other people here in Ocala. Actually, I think this was the book of the month for Olin International, The Anatomy of Peace. And I can't get into the whole story of it, but the subtitle of it is Resolving the Heart of Conflict. Resolving the Heart of Conflict. And the book starts out with the story of the Sultan of Egypt and Syria. He was born in 1137, died in 1193. His name was Saladin. That's what we call him in Western culture. I don't think that's his full name, but I'm not even going to try to go there to say his name. But I want to tell you a little bit about this man and why he's featured was featured so prominently in this book, at least to kind of open it. It says, the Sultan, properly known in the West as Saladin, is a rare figure in Middle Eastern history that earned the respect of Christians, Jews, and Muslims alike. He's primarily known for defeating the Crusaders at the Battle of Hattin and recapturing Jerusalem in 1187. Like everybody else, he had flaws, but history upholds him as a paragon of chivalry, compassion, and generosity. He was a universal figure. During the European conquest of Jerusalem in 1099, the Crusaders slaughtered Muslims and Jews alike, including women and children. So 88 years later, Saladin recaptures Jerusalem. The city's Christians, and what do you think they were feeling? A little scared, don't you think? They were fearing for their lives because they were certain that the Muslims would avenge the deaths of their people, and Saladin was certainly in a position to do so. Yet Saladin did not shed the blood of Christians in Jerusalem. He freed the old, he freed widows and children to ensure that they were not condemned to a life of slavery. For 40 days, he granted all Christians from foreign lands safe departure and allowed them to return to their respective countries with their property. He found male guardians for Christian women to ensure that they were provided protection and shelter on their return journey home. He allowed Eastern Christians to stay and reinstated the rights of every Jew to visit and resettle in Jerusalem. He conquered Jerusalem on a Saturday and ordered that the church be open on Sunday for services. When King Richard the Lionheart was left horseless on the battlefield during one of these skirmishes, Saladin sent him 2 horses so that he would not be at a disadvantage. Then when Richard fell sick, now remember, these guys were fighting against each other. They were enemies, right? Saladin sent him to his own doctor to speed his recovery. And when Richard needed to return home to consolidate power in the middle of the Third Crusade, Saladin negotiated a fair treaty and earned a place beside Plato and Aristotle in Dante's Divine Comedy. As one historian has said, the Crusades were fascinated by this Muslim leader who possessed virtues that they assumed were only Christian. Saladin offers a window into the rich history and peacefulness of Islam. He was a model of how we should respond in moments of peril and fear. For Saladin, victory is changing the hearts of your opponents with gentleness and kindness. His words from the 12th century may provide a valuable lesson even today. I warn you, these are his words, I warn you against shedding blood, indulging in it, or making a habit of it, for blood never sleeps. Now, isn't that interesting? Here we have a man who was literally at war, his country, but yet he was presented as a person with a heart of peace. He was a man at war, but his heart was at peace. And he's been recognized even today for that. There may be some things we can learn about that, don't you think? So that idea of having a heart at peace, what does that mean? How can we be in the midst of war? How can we be in the midst of conflict? How can we be in the midst of all of this crazy us and them and still have a heart at peace? Is that possible? Well, I'm going to say that it is. And I'm going to go through what it takes to have a heart at peace. And I'm going to run through these first so you see the overview of it, and then I'm going to talk about each one by one. So number 1, to have a heart at peace, we must humanize others. It is the idea of looking at the face of others and knowing that we're looking at the face of God, an expression. Right? We are human and we're divine. We're all of it. I don't care which side of the political spectrum you're on. We are all human beings. We are all the expressions of the divine, and we need to remember that. We need to embrace truth-telling. We need to embrace truth-telling. I've spent the past couple of weeks talking about our trip to Montgomery, Alabama, and the Peace and Justice Museum. And there's a lot of truth-telling. And there's a lot of uncomfortable truth-telling, but it has to be done. It has to be done. And so I've done a little bit of that. If you weren't here last week, our talks are recorded. You're welcome to go back and watch that, but we're going to talk about that a little more today. To have a heart at peace, we must actively engage other people's perspectives, right? The other. We must be looking to restore integrity in our relationships, integrity within ourselves, but also integrity in our relationships with other people. And the last one is to trust life. And if you see it makes up a little acronym, HEART, right? H-E-A-R-T. Just make it a little bit easier for you to remember. And me too. So what does it mean to humanize others? To humanize others. I can tell you what it is when we dehumanize people. How many of you are familiar with that term, dehumanizing other people? My favorite author, one of my favorite authors, Brene Brown, speaks of this really, really clearly and really well in a book called Braving the Wilderness. So I want to share, I don't like to read a lot, but I want to say just how she has written it because it's so profound to me. She says, dehumanization is a response to conflicting motives. We want to harm a group of people, but it goes against our wiring as members of a social species to actually harm, kill, torture, or degrade other human beings. Now, I've said this before, and I don't know if you all know this, but we are biologically wired for compassion. We are biologically wired for connection. So in order for people to commit atrocities, for people to do these horrible things to one another, we have to make them subhuman somehow. So we have very deep and natural inhibitions that prevent us from treating other people like animals, like game, or dangerous predators. Dehumanization is a way of subverting that. Dehumanization is a process. It is the psychological process of demonizing the enemy and of making them seem less than human and therefore not worthy of humane treatment. Dehumanizing often starts with creating an enemy image. We take sides, we lose trust, we get angrier and angrier, and we not only solidify the idea of the enemy, but we also start to lose our own ability to listen, to communicate, and to practice even a modicum of empathy. Because when we see those people that we believe to be objects or less than human, then they deserve what they're getting, right? Isn't that the perspective we come from? I put myself in that too. I don't take myself out of this. I speak. We teach what we want to learn, right? We teach what we want to know. And we are at a place where this is so important to understand. Once we see people on the other side of a conflict as morally inferior or even dangerous, conflict starts being framed as good versus evil. Parties come to believe that they must either secure their own victory or face defeat. The new goals are now to punish or destroy the opponent. Dehumanization has fueled innumerable acts of violence, human rights violations, war crimes, and genocides. It makes slavery, torture, and human trafficking possible. Dehumanizing others is the process by which we become accepting of violations against human nature, the human spirit, and for many of us, violations against essential tenets of our faith. Successful dehumanizing, however, creates moral exclusion. Groups targeted based on their identity, their gender, their ideology, skin color, ethnicity, religion, and age are depicted as less than, as being criminal or even evil. The targeted group eventually falls out of the scope of who is naturally protected by our moral code. This moral exclusion is dehumanization at its core. And we've seen this throughout history. So I've been focused this month on the racial divide in our country, but it also, I mean, look at what's happened to Native Americans, look what's happening what happened in Europe with Jews, what's happening in Bosnia. I mean, there's so many places in Rwanda, right? Here we go. I got ahead of myself. We see this throughout history. During the Holocaust, Nazis described Jews as Untermenschen. I'm not sure I'm saying that right. Being subhuman. Right? They called Jews rats and depicted them as disease-carrying rodents in everything from military pamphlets to children's books. The Hutus, who were involved in the Rwandan genocide, called Tutsis cockroaches. Indigenous people are often referred to as savages. Serbs call Bosnians aliens, and slave owners throughout history considered slaves as subhuman animals. If our faith asks us to find the face of God in everyone we meet, that should include politicians, media, and strangers on Twitter with whom we most violently disagree. Because when we desecrate their divinity, we desecrate our own and we betray our humanity. Amen. We see it, don't we? You know, and it's both sides. It's on all the sides, right? We think, well, but I'm for truth and I'm for justice. I'm love and light. But I feel these things come up. Does anyone else feel that? Yeah? As you're watching the news and you're hearing these stories, it's really easy to call out people's, to objectify them, not even want to use names of certain people, because we don't want to add any legitimacy to who they are. But we have to remember again, as soon as that happens, we're out again. Just keep doing. You need a mic? Different mic? Okay, all right. As soon as we do that to any other human being, we're doing it to ourselves. We're doing it to ourselves, right? The finger pointed at somebody else has 4 fingers pointing back at you. So we are to remember that we're all human beings, people worthy of compassion. All right, the other thing that we want to do is to embrace truth-telling. Embrace truth-telling. Embracing the truth, it requires courage. It requires courage. It's not easy. I shared some of my own shame around this idea of white supremacy, of this racial inequality in our country, and how I internalized some of that myself from growing up in what is essentially a institutionalized racist country. Right? Racism is institutionalized here, and if you don't believe that, educate yourself. Educate yourself. That's part of the idea of going out there and getting some other perspectives. This gentleman, I'm sharing this video because I think it's just so well done. The gentleman calls this woman who's on I think she's a journalist, and he calls and he asks her a question, and I just love the way she handles it, so I thought I'd share it with you all this morning.
I'm a white male, and I am prejudiced. It's something I wasn't taught, but it's kind of something that I learned. What can I do to change, to be a better American?
Responded off the top of my head, but from my heart, and I told him thank you, and I just came up with some thoughts about how he could sort of integrate his life and learn to have more empathy and compassion with people of color.
Your ability to just say, this is what I have these fears and prejudices, and I want to get over them, is one of the most powerful things that we can do. So what can you do? Get to know Black families. Join a church if you are a religious person that is a Black church, or a church that is interracial. Foster conversation in your family and in your neighborhood where you're asking exactly those kinds of questions.
I think a lot of white folks wanted to hear that they could make that kind of admission and not be greeted with the anger that they fear, but rather understanding and a sort of productive way forward. I went down to North Carolina and I met with Gary, and we furthered that conversation about race and asked each other hard questions, and it was amazing.
I said, this is somebody else I could talk to again, and here we are, we're talking to him again. When you get to know people, your fears are unjustified. Don't let it go by. If you got 8 million people responding positively to my insecurities, they must be having the same things.
Yeah.
It's just something that is we don't practice, and taking that first step is the hardest thing.
It's time for us to actually have a conversation with white folks, and it's time for white folks to have a conversation with each other about how it doesn't have to be a zero-sum game, that just because people of color might be advancing, just because there are more immigrants from different countries in our society, it doesn't mean that it has to come at your expense. There's just not enough of those conversations.
Thanks. I think the journalists just handled it so beautifully. You know, that it ended up being watched by over 8 million people. It's probably a lot more now, because it went viral, and then she went and met him in North Carolina, and they filmed this little bit here. You know, there's a lot of pain in that on both sides. You know, as we look at this national issue, there is pain and deep hurt on both sides. But if we don't address it, we continue to sweep it under the carpet, it never goes away. It will never go away. It continues to fester, and it will show up in other ways. Right? So we want to humanize people, and we want to remember that we're all human beings, and have compassion. Have compassion. Embrace telling the truth. That means we have to, we do, what is it in 12 steps? The fearless moral inventory. Right? We take a look at ourselves and see, how have I internalized these ideas that one race may be better than another, or that some people are superior to others, or that there's a norm. You know, and it's so subtle. I'll remember, I think it was on an episode of, it was on an Oprah show, and I cannot remember this woman's name. One of you will know probably. But she worked with kids. She did this experiment in her classroom where she, for 15 minutes, told the kids that the brown-eyed kids, I think, were inferior or superior to, it was one or the other. Jane Elliott, that's her name. One group of children, she said, because they were blue-eyed, maybe they were superior to the brown-eyed children. And treated them that way for only like 15 minutes. And these kids were like traumatized. They fell into the stereotypes so quickly and so easy. It blows your mind. Go online and look up the video. It's really quite incredible. So she was speaking on the Oprah show and talking about just the very subtle ways that this racism is in our culture. For one thing, think of something like flesh-toned stockings, right? Nylons that women used to wear. I don't wear them anymore, but what flesh tone? For whose flesh? For whose flesh, right? It's for Caucasian flesh. If you look at a box of crayons, right, and they had the flesh tone crayons, it's like flesh tone is white. I mean, not pure white, but you know what I'm saying. That is like the standard. You know, the white American male is the standard by which everything else, you know, goes. When there are medical testing that happens, it's done on white men. Everybody else is kind of an afterthought. You know, these are things, and it's not to point fingers or blame or make anyone feel bad about it. It's just acknowledging where we are. We talk about creating a world that works for everyone. Everyone. Like, let that be our destination. I shared with you last week on my trip how I plugged into my GPS and where I wanted to go, the hotel address. And because my phone was new and I hadn't allowed my phone to determine my current location, it couldn't tell me how to get where I was going. Duh! The dot was floating around on my phone. I'm like, where's the directions? Well, it doesn't know where you are. If the phone doesn't know where I am, if we don't know where we are, how do we know how to get where we're going? We have to acknowledge the truth of the present situation. No matter how ugly, no matter how unpleasant, we need to look at it. We need to look at it. Why is that so hard? Why is it so hard, Gail asked. I think it's, and this is a whole other talk, a lot of Brene Brown stuff, but the idea of shame. You know, shame, believe it or not, is a universal emotion. Every single one of us has things that we feel shame about. And those are the very deepest, very ugliest, the very nastiest things that we don't ever want to. Don't uncover that. I don't go there. We don't go there. We don't talk about that in our family. We don't talk about that in this culture. I mean, I just saw the book, To Kill a Mockingbird, has been taken off some lists, like removed from libraries. Why? Because it makes people feel uncomfortable. Well, duh, that's what it's supposed to do. It's supposed to make you feel uncomfortable. It's supposed to make you look at those dark, ugly little things so you can clean it up, so you can release it. That's the purpose of it. So embrace truth-telling, no matter how difficult, no matter how painful, and know that everyone has some element of that shame and pain that they're dealing with on all sides of these issues. The next thing is to actively engage other people's perspectives. Actively engage. Start having the conversations. Dive into it. Right? Instead of avoiding it, instead of running the other way, just take a chance and ask somebody for their point of view. Ask somebody why they believe the way they do. And we have Brunch Sunday here today. We have a very diverse community right here. We could be open to having those conversations right here, right now. What was it like for you growing up? Right? What is your pain around this topic? Ask somebody. I'm going to get into this a little bit more next week when I start sharing about processes that can be done and actually bringing people together in a circle. I have two of my cohorts over here, Nira and Corinne, that we are working on right now, the vision, the mission. There are others as well, but vision and mission for a nonprofit organization that we're starting called Circle Up, that is around bringing people together in circle, bringing people of diverse backgrounds together to have dialogue with one another. We're talking cops and kids. We're talking kids and their teachers. We're talking black and white. We're talking all different kinds of people from divergent perspectives coming together in an effort to see our common humanity and bridge that gap, bridge that divide, so it's not us and them anymore. It's all of us together. We want to restore integrity in our relationships with ourselves and with others. What does that word integrity mean? What does that mean? For me, wholeness. I heard someone say wholeness. Absolutely, integrity is wholeness. Integrity for me is when what we think, what we say, and what we do all line up. Everything together. I'm not thinking one thing and doing another. Has anyone ever done that? You may have one thing in your mind, something you want to say, but you say something else and then you go, ugh. It doesn't feel good. It doesn't feel good when we are out of integrity with ourselves. It doesn't feel good when we are out of integrity in our relationships with other people. You see, as soon as you put somebody in the category of an object, and maybe you're not thinking object, but again, I feel like I'm hurt, it's that person's fault. It's that individual. We're making them the other again. We are out of integrity. As soon as we put someone in the category of other, we are out of integrity with ourselves and in our relationship. Ernest Holmes, this is a quote from Ernest Holmes, who is the founder of the teaching that we share here in Centers for Spiritual Living. And he said this: when we become pure in heart, we become perfect in spiritual vision. Purity of heart. Purity of heart. When we find the purity of the divine pattern within ourselves, we can then see it in others. We reach God in others by reaching out from God within ourselves. Always the God in others will respond to the God in us, but never beyond the level of our inward awareness. In other words, we have to be able to grasp it. We have to have that clarity within ourselves, that purity of heart, that integrity where what we think, what we say, and what we do lines up. And then we become a clear kind of a channel. Does that make sense? Right? When you've got these places where you're out of integrity, where you're out of alignment, those sticky spots, life doesn't flow as well. Your relationships are not going to be what they could be. But we don't have any control over anybody else. Right? The only ones we have any control over is ourselves, our own behavior, our own thoughts, our own actions. We can't change anyone else. But then the other really cool thing is something else. Another one of the basic tenets of what we teach here is that when you change your thinking, you change your life. When you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. It's really quite amazing. And it's totally an inside job. So restoring your own integrity, that means being clear about what your values are being clear about what's important to you. Many of us, we get our values from our church, from our parents, from culture outside, and we may live inside of those values. But then as we grow older, we learn different things, we gain new perspective, our values change. Our values change. It's perfectly normal. The thing is to know what are your values, and are you living by what is important to you, not what somebody else's values are. And that's where the integrity comes in. Know your values, know what is important to you, and live by that. The last one is trust life. We should develop the practice of communing daily with the spirit that resides within us. That's spiritual practice. Right? Do each of you have some kind of spiritual practice? Some time where you get up in the morning and just commune with spirit, whether that's walking, whether it's just in the quiet of meditation. Have some kind of spiritual practice. Is it giving gratitude? Is it in the evening before you go to sleep? We all need to spend some time communing with that spirit. Such communication should be based on a deep inward sense of belonging to life, of being part of it, of trusting it, and of having confidence in it. And knowing that as we do so, the future is certain in such degree as we make the present a time of joy, of happiness, of peace, and of goodwill toward others. See, when we trust life, when we trust the process, when we trust spirit, we don't have to have all the answers. Right? Maybe that's another thing that gets us hung up, right? Like, but I don't know what to do. I don't know what to say. When you trust life, when you trust the process, you know you don't have to know. You don't have to have all the answers right now. You just have to know that when you are presented with a situation, the answer will come. The answer will be there. And if you come from that space, it will always be there. It's always there. So trust life. You may not even trust yourself. You may not trust yourself to know. But if you trust the spirit that runs in and around and through all things that has the answers, then you can tap into that. You don't have to know it all right now. Just trust that there is a power that is greater than you that does have the answers. So heart. H-E-A-R-T. Does anyone remember the first one? H was for humanizing people. E was for embrace truth-telling. A was for, I have to look back. What was that? Actively engage other people. Thank you. R was for restoring relationship, restoring integrity. And T was for trusting life. This is another Ernest Holmes quote. Love is a synonym for God, and God is love, which we said at the beginning, right? It is the universal outpouring of spirit through law, wisdom, life, and action. God knows us in love, and we can know God only through love. Get that? We can only know God, we can only experience that beloved community through love. When we love humanity, we are loving God in and through others. And I have another little video. This is only about 2 minutes. Y'all know who he is, right? Mr. Rogers. I think this is just a 2-minute clip. It's just a kind of it just pulls all of it together. When you see how beautifully Mr. Rogers presents the situation.
It's a beautiful day in this.
But not everyone knows that this cardigan-clad king of children's TV, Fred Rogers, was actually a pioneer who challenged racial stereotypes in media. Enter Francois Clemens.
Francois Scarborough Clemens.
And his role as Officer Clemens made him one of the first recurring black characters on a children's TV show.
When I started, there were 2-3 shows, period, on television that employed a black character.
Francois grew up during the Civil Rights Movement and times of great racial tension in the U.S.
So when Fred asked me to be a police officer, Fred, are you sure? Do you know what policemen represent in the community where I was raised? And then he started talking about children needing helpers and the positive influence that I could have for young children. My heart opened as I listened to him.
He accepted the role, not knowing he would end up playing Officer Clemens for 30 years. And one of his most memorable scenes is also one of his favorites.
There are many ways to say I love you. It's a very big deal for me to be putting my feet in the water with Fred.
During a time of segregation, the symbolism wasn't lost on Francois.
To say that he didn't know what he was doing, or that he accidentally stumbled into integration or talking about racism or sexism, that's not Mr. Rogers. It was well planned and well thought out, and I think it was very impactful. There are many ways to say I love you.
That impact was felt by many, but for Francois, it was personal.
I was in the studio one day. That particular day, he was filming the end of the show, and when he got to the part, he said, "You make every day a special day."
You know how? By just your being you.
And I swear it was like, he was looking right into my eyes. And when the music stopped, I said, "Fred, were you talking to me?" And he said, "Yes, I have been talking to you for years, but you heard me today."
You make every day a special day.
Have you seen the where he was basically first starting out and he went to the judicial system for fun?
Yes.
That's a good video with
Yes.
that.
Yes, he really was quite a pioneer. And see how beautifully it was done. Right? Just so beautiful. I'll leave you with this quote from Dr. Martin Luther King. "Returning hate for hate multiplies hate, adding deeper darkness to it, a night already devoid of stars. Darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that." Almost sneezed halfway through. Ah, yes. So just breathe in. And we say our affirmation together. The love in others responds to the love in me. My heart is at peace.